Ray, welcome to Story Time, Year 5 and 6, and we're on to Chapter 3 of Susan Cooper's Over Sea Under Stone. Chapter 3 is a massive one, so I'm not going to read the whole thing today. We'll do 10 pages and the rest tomorrow. Okay, so plugging on. If you're wondering why I'm sitting on the floor, by the way, it's because I'm trying to find a place in the house that's quiet and free of under fives, so hopefully we'll remain undisturbed. Chapter 3. As Simon's head emerged through the hatch at the top, he caught his breath just as Barney had. And sneezed enormously. Clouds of dust rose and the ladder shook. "Hey," said Barney protestingly from below, drawing his face back from his brother's twitching heels. Simon opened his watering eyes and blinked. Before him and all around was one vast attic, the length and breadth of the whole house, with two grubby windows in its sloping roof. It was piled higgledy-piggledy with the most fantastic collection of objects he had ever seen. Boxes, chests and trunks lay everywhere, with mounds of dirty grey canvas and rough-coiled ropes between them. Stacks of newspapers and magazines, yellow-brown with age, a brass bedstead and a grandfather clock without a face. As he stared he saw smaller things, a broken fishing rod, a straw hat perched on the corner of an oil painting, darkened by age into one great grey-black blur, an empty mousetrap, a ship in a bottle, a glass-fronted case full of chunks of rock, a pair of old thigh boots flopped over sideways as if they were tired, a cluster of battered pewter mugs. "Gosh," said Simon. Muffled noises of protest came from below, and he hauled himself out through the opening and rolled sideways out of their way on the floor. Barney and Jane came through after him. "Simon," said Jane, gazing at him in horror, "you're filthy." "Well, isn't that just like a girl? All this round you and you only see a bit of dust. It'll brush off." He patted ineffectually at his piebald shirt. "But isn't it marvellous? Look!" Barney, cooing with delight, was picking his way across the littered floor. "There's an old ship's wheel, and a rocking chair, and a saddle. I wonder if the captain ever had a horse." Jane had been trying to look insulted, but failed. "This is something like exploring. We might find anything up here." "It's a treasure cave. This is what the natives were after. Hear them howling with frustrated rage down there. Dancing round in a little circle with the witch doctor cursing us all." "Well, he can curse away," Barney said cheerfully. "We've got enough provisions for ages. I'm hungry." "Oh, not yet. You can't be. It's only 4 o'clock. "Well, that's tea time. Anyway, when you're on the run you eat little and often, because you daren't ever stop for long. If we were Eskimos we'd be chewing an old shoelace. My book says—" "Never mind your book," Simon said. He fished inside the rucksack. "Here, have an apple and keep quiet. I want to look at everything properly before we have our picnic, and if I can wait, so can you." "I don't see why," Barney said, but he bit into his apple cheerfully and wandered across the floor, disappearing between the high brass skeleton of the old bed and an empty cupboard. For half an hour they poked about in a happy, dusty dream, through the junk and broken furniture and ornaments. It was like reading the story of somebody's life, Jane thought, as she gazed at the tiny matchstick masts of the ship sailing motionless forever in the green glass bottle. All these things had been used once, had been part of every day in the house below. Someone had slept on the bed, anxiously watched the minutes on the clock, pounced joyfully on each magazine as it arrived. But all those people were long gone, or gone away, and now the oddments of their lives were piled up here, forgotten. She found herself feeling rather sad. "I'm ravenous," Barney said plaintively. "I'm thirsty. It's all that dust. Come on, let's unload Mrs. Polk's tea." "This attic's rather a swizz," Simon said, squatting on a cracking edge of canvas and undoing the rucksack. "All the really interesting boxes are locked. Look at that one, for instance." He nodded towards a black metal chest with 2 rusting padlocks on its lid. "I bet it's full of the family jewels." "Well," said Jane regretfully, "we aren't supposed to touch anything locked, are we?" "There's a lot not locked," Simon said, handing her the bottle of lemonade. "Here, you'll have to swig from the bottle. We forgot to bring any cups. Don't worry, we won't pinch anything." though I shouldn't think anyone's been up here for years. Food, Barney said. The scones are in that bag there, help yourself. 4 each I've counted. Barney reached out an extremely dirty hand. Oh, Barney, Jane squeaked. Wipe your hand. You'll eat all sorts of germs and get typhoid or rabies or something. Here, have my handkerchief. Rabies is mad dogs, Barney said, looking with interest at the black fingerprints on his scone. Anyway, Father says people make too much fuss about germs. Oh, all right, Jane, stop waving that silly thing at me. I've got a proper handkerchief of my own. I don't know how girls ever blow their noses. Scowling, he thrust his free hand into his pocket, and then his expression changed to disgust. Ugh, he said, and brought out a brown, squashed apple core. Oh, I'd forgotten that. All cold and horrible. He flung the core away from him into the far corner of the attic. It bounced, slithered, and rolled into the shadows. Simon grinned. Now you'll bring the rats out. All attics have rats. We shall hear greedy little squeakings and see green points of fire, and there'll be rats all over the floor. First they'll eat the apple core, and then they'll come after us. Jane turned pale. Oh no, there wouldn't be rats up here, would there? If there were, they'd have eaten all the newspaper, Barney said hopefully, wouldn't they? I expect they don't like ink. All old houses have rats. We've got them at school. You can hear them scuttling about in the roof sometimes. Come to think of it, their eyes are red, not green. Simon's voice began to lose its brightness. He was beginning to feel slightly unhappy about the rats himself now. I think maybe you'd better pick that apple core up, you know, just in case. Barney gave an exaggerated sigh and got to his feet, swallowing his scone in 2 gigantic bites. Where did it go then? Over there somewhere. I wonder why they didn't put anything in this corner. He crawled about on his hands and knees aimlessly. Come and help, I can't find it. Then he noticed a triangular gap in the sloping wall of the attic where its planks joined the floor. He peered through and saw daylight gleaming in through the tiles dimly. Just inside the gap the floorboards ended, and he could feel wide spaced beams. I think it must have gone through this hole, he called. I'm going to look. Jane dived across the floor towards him. Oh, do be careful, there might be a rat. Couldn't be, Barney said halfway through the gap. There's light coming through the tiles and I can see, more or less. Can't see any core though. I wonder if it fell between the floorboards and the underneath part. Ow! His rear half jerked suddenly. What is it? Oh, do come out, Jane tugged at his shorts. I touched something, but it can't be a rat. It didn't move. Where's it gone? Here it is. It feels like cardboard. Blah, there's that disgusting core next to it as well. His voice grew suddenly louder as he backed out of the hole, flushed and blinking. Well, there it is, he said, triumphantly, flourishing the apple core. Now the rats have to come and get it. I still don't believe there are any. What's that other thing you've got? Simon looked curiously at a tattered scroll-like object in Barney's other hand. Piece of wallpaper, I think. I bet you've eaten all the scones, you pigs. Barney bounded back across the floor, making the floorboards rattle. He sat down, pulled out his handkerchief, waved it ostentatiously at Jane, wiped his hands and began to munch another scone. As they ate, he reached over and idly unrolled the scroll he'd found, holding one end down on the floor with his toe and pushing the other back with a piece of wood until it lay stretched open before them. And then, as they saw what it was, they all suddenly forgot their eating and stared. The paper Barney had unrolled was not paper at all, but a kind of thick brownish parchment, springy as steel, with long raised cracks crossing it where it had been rolled. Inside it another sheet was stuck down, darker, looking much older, ragged at the edges and covered with small writing in strange squashed-looking dark brown letters. Below the writing it dwindled, as if it had been singed by some great heat long ago, into half-detached pieces, carefully laid back together and stuck to the outer sheet. But there was enough of it left to see at the bottom a rough drawing that looked like an uncertain outline of a map. For a moment they were all very quiet. Barney said nothing, but he could feel a strange excitement bubbling up inside him. He leant forward in silence and carefully stretched the manuscript flat. pushing the piece of wood aside. "Here," Simon said. "I'll get something to weight the edges down." They put an old paperweight, a pewter mug and 2 carefully dusted chunks of wood on the corners and sat back on their heels to look. "Oh, it's terribly old," Jane said. "Centuries, thousands of years." "Like those papers in glass cases in museums, with little curtains to keep the light out." "Where did it come from? How did it get up here?" "Well, somebody must have hidden it." "But it's older than the house. I mean, look at it. It must be some of the writing's nearly faded away." "It wasn't hidden," Barney said with absolute conviction, though he had no clear idea why. "Someone just threw it down where I found it." Simon whooped suddenly, making them jump. "This is terrific! Do you realise we've got a real live treasure map? It could lead us to anything, anywhere. Secret passages, real hidden caves, the treasure of Terrific." He rolled the words lovingly around his tongue. "There isn't much map, it's all writing." "Well then, that's instructions. 'Look in ye little room on ye second floor,' I expect it says. Ye second floorboard on ye left. When this was written, there weren't such things as floorboards." "Oh, come off it, it's not that old." "I'll bet it is," Barney said quietly. "Anyway, you look at this writing. You can't read it. It's all in some funny language." "Of course you can read it if you look properly," Simon said impatiently. In his mind he was already halfway through the sliding panel, throwing back the lid of a chest to reveal hoards of untold wealth. He could almost hear the chink of doubloons. "Let's have a look." He leant forward, the floorboards hard and rough under his knees, and peered at the manuscript. There was a long pause. "Oh," he said at last reluctantly. Barney said nothing, but looked at him very expressively indeed. "Well, all right, there's no need to look so cocky. It isn't in English. But that doesn't mean we shan't be able to find out what it says." "Why isn't it in English?" "Well, how on earth should I know?" "I mean," Barney said patiently, "that we're in England. So what other language could it possibly be in?" "Latin," Jane said unexpectedly. She had been looking quietly at the manuscript over Simon's shoulder. "Latin?" "Yes, all old manuscripts are written in Latin. The monks used to write them down with a goose feather for a pen, and put flowers and birds and things all squiggling around the capital letters." "There isn't anything squiggling here. It looks as if it's been written in rather a hurry. I can't even see any capital letters at all." "But why Latin?" said Barney. "Oh, I don't know. The monks just always used it, that's all. It was one of their things. I suppose it's a religious-sounding kind of language." "Well, Simon does Latin." "Yes, come on, Simon, translate it," Jane said maliciously. At school she had not yet begun Latin, but he had been learning it for 2 years and was rather superior about the fact. "I don't think it's Latin at all," Simon said rebelliously. He peered at the manuscript again. "This writing's so odd. The letters all look the same, like a lot of little straight lines all in a row. The light in here isn't very good either." "You're just making excuses." "No, I'm not. It's jolly difficult." "Well, if you can't even recognise Latin when you see it, you can't be nearly as good as you make out." "Have another look," said Barney hopefully. "I think it's in 2 parts," Simon said slowly. "One little paragraph on top, and then a lot more all together after a gap. The second bit I can't make out at all, but the first paragraph does look as if it might be Latin. The first word looks like come, that means with, but I can't see what comes after it. Then later on there's post multus amnos, that's after many years, but the writing's all so small and squashy I can't... Wait a minute, there's some names in the first line. It says Marco Arturok. Like Marco Polo," Jane said doubtfully. "What a funny name." "Not one name, it's 2. K means and, only they've put it on the end instead of in the middle. And O on the end is an ablative of us, so that means by, with or from Marcus and Arturus." "By, with or from? Barney, whatever's the matter?" Barney, red in the face and spluttering, had suddenly thumped his fist on the floor, caught his breath trying to say something, and collapsed into a thunderous fit of coughing. They patted him on the back and gave him a drink of lemonade. "Marcus and Arturus," he said hoarsely, gulping his breath back. "Don't you see? It's Mark and Arthur. It's about King Arthur and his knights.